What we call upskilling is ultimately like the continued education. The thing a lot of people don't really think about once they get out of school, there's a lot of folks who are like, all right, that's it. I got my education. Let's go jump into the big league.
College actually does very little to prepare
Yeah.
you. So that constant mindset of growth is what will help you with upskilling. Welcome to episode 8 of This is the Way with Artin and Michael. We've actually made it to episode 8. Woo-hoo. So we're here to share our experience, insights, and knowledge around career growth, side hustles, and startups, and hopefully help pave the way for others who were in the same shoes as we were a long time ago. So today episode, we want to focus on upskilling for your career growth. I think a lot of people are going to ask, like, what the hell is that even? So, Michael, you want to kind of explain what the hell that even is?
Sure. What we call upskilling is ultimately like the continued education. The thing a lot of people don't really think about once they get out of school, there's a lot of folks who are like, all right, that's it. I got my education. Let's go jump into the big leagues. And they learn more or less whatever they learn on the job. So that's the argument people can make is, well, I'm continue to learn every day. I have to learn how to operate, SAP if that's what your, company is using or whatever internal tools. But it's beyond that. This is thinking about the skills that you're going to need I think I referenced before in the last one, skate to where the puck is going. So you want to make sure that you're actually upskilling yourself so that you could stay ahead of the pack because so many people, when it comes down to it, they're not making this a priority and really focusing on it in their career. And you have to do that because if you're not moving forward and advancing, then ultimately you're falling behind because the advancements and how quickly technology has been moving. Forget the fact that we've got AI now nipping at heels over the past several years. And since, we've been in our careers, technology has constantly happened so fast that I don't know about you, Artin, but I have felt like when I came out of college, we jumped into our jobs and all of a sudden I'm like, great, my college education didn't teach me anything about what I need to learn now. It's time for me to start picking up the skills on the job, but to also be thinking one step ahead to pick up the skills that I'm going to need next year.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how little college actually prepares you. I mean, I
Yep.
guess if it's a specific careers like medical school or
Sure.
law degree, putting those type of careers aside, most other careers, college actually does very little to prepare
Yeah.
you. So that constant mindset of growth is what will help you with upskilling. But figuring out what is it that you actually have to learn, and because there's so much that you can learn, especially with everything out in the market right now and online.
Yeah.
How do you even figure out what you need to learn? I think that itself becomes a little bit of a strategy of what to do, when to do it, how to apply it, how much of it is just learning and how much of it is application. It could get complicated. So, just curious your thoughts on what are some easy ways that people could acquire that extended education and knowledge and level themselves up. And I sometimes thought about it as every 1 to 2 year I wanted to reinvent myself, and not to say that I wanted to, like, all of a sudden I'm going from this different person. No, I'm still the same person, same personality, same way. But as far as what I'm capable of doing, how do I reinvent myself every 1 or 2 years? And I think that's what drove me to have a growth mindset and constantly look for those learning opportunities. So just curious, like, what are some things that you've done in the past, or what are some ways that the listeners could actually upskill?
Yeah. It's funny. Just a thought that came to mind when you mentioned that about every few years is companies like Google, and there's not too many out there that do this, but if you do, they will actually purposely try to change people's roles every few years because um, internally, each of us are looking for this level of growth. And sometimes at that stage, if you don't have growth, you actually start to, I don't want to say get comfortable. That could happen at any point, but it is true. One of them is we get comfortable, but then we also start to feel burnout because when you're not growing, there's no progression, and naturally, then we start to feel like we're not feeling being fulfilled. And so I think that and what they're on to, and part of the reason they do that and leverage it to their benefit, um, ties back to actually, as you mentioned, your own reinvention. I'm like, oh, that's kind of, interesting, and think about it there. And there is some science that ends up backing that up that really does look at that, because that's where a lot of people after a few years are looking for a promotion and other things. The difference is there are some individuals who have actively been upskilling for the promotion, and there are others who believe that from doing their job, they've earned that promotion. Sometimes it works out that way, but when you're working with 4 or 5 other people who've done that, that's where upskilling and the continued education is super important. But some ways that I've done it, um, it kind of depends on the tactics. So I'll take it back a step first, and I think it is really helpful to understand again once more where somebody's trying to go, because in knowing that, it's easier to start thinking about the specific skills that you need to learn, and then from there you could decide, is that a skill that you need to learn by watching a video, taking a course, aligning yourself with the right mentor would be possibly another way to do it. You and I actually went to conventions in our past, and it's actually something that I still remember, because we had different people who, when we're like, well, we're going, and they're like, oh, the company's paying for it, and we're like, well, no, we're going to pay for it, and they're like, wait, why would you do that? If the company's not going to pay for it, why would you do it? And we're like, it's it's an investment in ourselves, and this was a field we want to learn about, and just because a company wasn't going to pay for this convention didn't mean we were going to hinder our own education. And I think that is so important, and something that so many people are doing wrong in their careers, is somehow thinking that it's their employer's job to train them, and somehow thinking that got the upper hand when they don't go and pay out of their own pocket for something, because they think, yeah, I'm not going to let the employer take advantage of me by me paying IA. No, it's an investment in yourself. So
Yeah, I find it fascinating when people look at an expensive course, a $3,000 convention, or some of these more pricey items
yeah,
as an expense, while I always looked at it as an investment. And because I always looked at those as investments, I had no problem paying for it out of my own pocket, and never even thought about asking the company, Disney or anybody else, to pay for it, because I just thought, this is an investment in myself.
yeah,
I need to take full control and ownership of that. I'm not
totally.
going to let it ride on the books of somebody else. And what you said about uh, the different approaches. One way that I found upskilling really worked for me was actually trying to learn stuff by doing it, and doing it on a side project or a side hustle. To me, that was probably the most impactful investment in myself and education that
Yeah.
I got, because when you're an employee and you're working somewhere, most of your day you are boxed within your job description. Uh, so if you're in marketing, most of your things you do is marketing. You
Mm-hmm.
might interact with others in sales and technology and operation, and other departments, but your focus is marketing. But when you do try to do your own project, you actually start learning about everything else that happens.
Yeah.
And then what's fascinating is when you learn about, let's say you're in technology, but then you now have to learn how to operate this thing that you're building on the side. Now you learn about operations. And then you come back and you apply those operational learnings to your technology role. People notice, and people pay attention. And it's fascinating how much faster you could rise, because you just shine,
Yeah.
and you took ownership of it. That to me, that was the best way that I upskill myself, was just constantly pursue side projects and passion projects on the side. And the other thing you said about some of the stuff, I think what you have to be careful about is not to allow, um, like online, let's say you're taking online courses, you have a mentor, you're doing conventions. It might feel productive, but you have to be careful not to be fooled either. This false sense of progression, because just because you're learning stuff doesn't mean you're progressing. But a lot of people, and even myself, I've had moments where I've had this false sense of progression because I'm learning something and I'm like, okay, I'm not stuck. But it's actually how you apply all those. I mean, if you have to apply and execute, that's where the real learning happens, and that's where the real progress happens, which then leads to happiness, because progress is happiness. When you're
Right.
not moving, that's when you get, stuck in your own way, and you start feeling like, where am I going, what is the meaning of life, and then you're 45 and you have a mid-crisis. Maybe that's a little harsh to say, but but yeah, you know what I mean. It's just
Yeah.
you need that progression, and just you have to be careful not to get fooled by just the learning aspect of it.
Yeah, there's a term that has stuck with me, called action faking, which is the idea that people, feel like just taking action means that they're making progress, and it doesn't. And today I was listening to something from Layla Hormozy, and what she was talking about is how people in their she was mainly speaking on entrepreneur level, but I think it applies both ways. But how people will, the entrepreneur is a term of somebody who, talks about being an entrepreneur, but they're really not taking the action. But they're educating. And what they'll say is, well, as soon as I learn this, I'll be able to do X, Y, Z. But really, the critical thing is that you're trying to learn the things that you can actually apply and put into practice. Because if you're not, you'll just be learning that next thing so that you're prepared for it. And you're thinking almost way too far in the future. Like, well, one day I'll need this when I'm a CEO. That's great. But what do you need now to get to that next level and that you actually have to achieve by then?
Yeah,
One
yeah.
of the things to sorry, you and I also, we've always been really big on reading books. And it wasn't abnormal that at least a book a month. I know sometimes we might have been even a couple of books a month. And I think that's another thing that gave us this huge edge, because we like to read books that everything from self-improvement to business. And like, we are the ones, I mean, at Disney, it amazed me how many people worked there, like, how many few people were actually reading Bob Iger's biography, autobiography. And the same goes, when I was at Netflix. It's like, look, there are these books and these things out there that these leaders have put together that get you into their mind, as well as there is just so much content out there. And that allowed us, when we went into meetings, to be talking about things that even people with MBAs, because theirs was dated to what they had, weren't even thinking about. And it always gave us this edge. And when you mentioned your, side hustle and what you did there, I can say too, I witnessed how not only the stuff that I just mentioned from books and everything else you would learn, but also when you were showing up in those conversations, you'd literally built software solutions. You were having conversations with the people in technology from this approach that was really unique, because you came from a background that was heavily understanding the operational side of it, but now you were able to apply that, and it made you a double threat, if you will, which was something that a lot of people there didn't understand. Technology folks didn't always understand operations, and you were able to bridge that, and the company benefited greatly from it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I do remember I would sit in meetings, and I would, present my ideas and opinions, and I would see some like eyeballs, like, well, how did he know this? I'm not
Yeah.
a technologist. I didn't disclose how I knew it, but it was all about, I was building a tech startup on the side, so I knew exactly what to do and how to do it better, because I
Yeah.
was testing on the side.
And then
Yeah, it's fascinating. The books as well. The books are such an amazing jewel. I mean, there's so much knowledge there that you sometimes get addicted to constantly absorbing it. I remember there was a period where it was like, if I wasn't reading at night and then I didn't have an Audible while driving to the office, I felt like I was failing. Now, again,
yeah.
I think part of that goes back to what I said about a false sense of progression. Uh, but, you know, I'll take that addiction over any other type of addiction any day.
Sure, right? Yeah, exactly. I agree. You know,
Yeah.
with what you mentioned about, okay, hold on, what was it? It was the when you were in those meetings. Oh yeah. So when you considered, like, you had a huge job when it came to the integration after the acquisition of Disney buying Fox and 20th Century Fox. And I think what's so interesting about that is it was in many ways what you learned working on your side hustle and what we were just mentioning with that marriage between technology and operations, that when you now have these two companies together with all these platforms and you got to start thinking about how you move forward. I mean, that I think was an opportunity that was presented your way, including you being aligned with somebody that you really wanted to, have the opportunity to work for, because once more, learning hack, report to somebody that you have a lot of admiration for and that you can learn a lot from. That's going to advance you even further. But the reality of bringing those things together helped position you for that, because you just seem like a natural fit because you understood both those key sides during this integration. What was that acquisition? I can't remember what the whole Fox deal was. Was it 70
71
something?
billion.
Yeah.
71
So,
billion.
yeah. So to be on, the studio, I think front is especially where you were focused, right? With that
Yeah,
integration.
yeah. The focus was how to integrate Fox's studio operation with Disney's studio operation, which was no small task. And I have to thank my boss at Disney, Barry. If Barry's listening right now, thank you for that opportunity. It was an amazing experience. But what was a funny story with that? So, as that deal was being announced at first and hit the press, it took a while until it closed. And because of SEC regulations and some of the other things around laws, nobody at Disney could actually interact with anybody at Fox. It was kind of not allowed. So it wasn't until the deal closed where I was given the green light. Okay, go. Let's figure out how does their operation work, best practices that can be adopted. But leading up to that, it took about a year to lead up to that. That same period, there was a lot of conversations about my startup being acquired. uh, so I started reading on, well, what does that even look like? If somebody acquires a company, what is that integration and figuring out how to go best about it? And everything that I was reading pointed me to the most difficult part of merging two organizations is culture.
I was going to say it. Yep.
So then, when the time came and I presented my plan, I had already done so much reading and educating myself on startup acquisitions that I'm like, well, yeah, sure, startup is small, but the fundamentals are going to apply to a $71 billion acquisition as well. So
Yeah.
my plan on how to go about that project was 100% focused on the culture, and out of the culture would come the X's and O's, and how did Fox do what they did.
Yeah.
So my strategy was understand their culture and make sure they understand Disney's culture, but then build relationship and try to kind of be part of their culture to then have the doors open to me as a partner, instead of looking at this big Disney monster that just bought Fox and they're going to do whatever they want. That's not how I approached it. And I want to say it went really well, because I still have really good relationship with a lot of those folks that I work with during that integration.
Yeah.
So just another example of upskilling that I did on the side to prepare me when actually the job presented itself.
And I think with that too, earlier I mentioned double threat, but maybe we should say actually there was a triple threat that you brought to this, because there was a technology component, the operations component, but you've also uh, it's sometimes that curiosity set, but you've always leaned into the side, with people, of really trying to understand and possessing that sort of people skill, and it's showed up in your leadership of when you've helped coach, guide others, lead teams. But I think in this scenario it really was there, because there's some people who might just come in and be like, here's what we're doing and there's this, and then what I've learned even from my experience is sometimes when you end up taking over teams, if you lean with that instead of listening first, then you've lost everybody and the whole thing could fall apart. I
Yeah,
think,
listening at an individual level
yeah.
is a superpower, in my opinion. But
And
really listening, not doing it uh, coming across fake and disingenuous, like
yeah,
being genuinely interested in listening at an individual level. I think is a superpower that opens up doors, builds relationship, and makes networking easier.
yeah. No, it's a great point. something that came to my mind as well as like, so uh, when I moved over to Netflix, because Netflix is a company that they were literally inventing a solution, that hadn't existed before. Going from physical disc mailing into eventually being like, let's license content for our platform, and then the studios didn't see it coming as all of a sudden they're like, oh shoot, they're taking and growing their business so quickly, and then from there it became let's start producing our own content. So what had happened there is Netflix was hiring, people that were experts across the industry to try to help build that, but that wasn't enough because the way that their approach was is they didn't want to just build what everybody else had done. They wanted to now build what the solution was that everybody wishes they would have done. And again, you don't get there without having that mentality where you are thinking, forget just the 2 years ahead, we said, but often 5, 10 years ahead. How are you thinking about these solutions that don't exist now to make and produce, movies and to finish the content? So I think that's the other thing is for people who are looking to get into these companies that are, who claim to hire only the top performers. You're not a top performer if you're not continually pushing yourself, your education, to those limits. So I think it's critical if people want to get into certain companies. In fact, it's a question I tried to do during job interviews is to try to test the curiosity, that growth mindset, and if the person was continually learning, educating themselves. Because I don't want somebody who I have to constantly say, hey, did you read? Well, I don't mind saying, did you read this? But I want the person who's also coming and saying to me, hey, this thing is great, and me to be like, oh, that's great. Like I want us to discover things for each other, not just a one-way street where I'm constantly like, look at this. And oftentimes when you do that, by the way, with people, is there's always the, oh, I didn't do it, which I think takes us to priorities. How do people prioritize this upskilling in their jobs when oftentimes what people will say is they're always so busy with what they have in front of them?
You have to schedule it. First of all, from a mindset perspective, you have to create a sense of urgency around it and make it very important,
Yeah.
and then schedule it. It honestly is no different than going to the gym. If somebody is not able to exercise twice a week for 30 minutes, it's because they're just not prioritizing it.
Yep.
I don't buy the excuse of I don't have time. I know personally when I've had those down times of not being able to go to the gym for like 5, 6 months, and then mentally I uh, told myself, well, I didn't have time. Then I had to check myself out. I'm like, shut up. You had
Yeah.
time. You just didn't want to prioritize it.
Yeah.
You wanted to do X, Y, and Z instead. So it's the same thing. If you want to upskill by reading a book, well, at night, maybe instead of watching an hour of TV, make it half an hour of TV and read for half an hour. Like
Yeah.
there is time. We just had to prioritize it.
Yeah. And I think if people find themselves saying, I don't have time, I think you almost have to say, well, if this was a priority for me, how would I make the time? And like you and I, in future episodes, we could talk about some of our time management tips and how we approach things. But no matter what, you will always face a struggle with time. You just have to determine the priority. And if you're not prioritizing this upskilling and educating yourself, or you're defaulting to a company to do it for you, then unfortunately you're going to be disappointed, I think, with your results. You're going to find yourself falling behind again when everybody else is, moving ahead. So I
Yeah.
100% agree with that.
When for my teams, anybody that was new to my team, whether I hired or people under me hired, one of the requirements was always to read 3 books within the first 3 months. That was kind of an initiation into my teams.
Yep.
The books changed every year. One of them that stayed constant was How to Win Friends and Influence People. To me, that was a book that everybody must read. I would here and there, for certain new hires and people that join, I would get the thing, oh my God, I'm so sorry I couldn't get to this. I've been so busy. My response always was, did you were you did you have lunch? Did you have dinner the last few days? They're like, yeah, of course, we have to eat. I'm like, well, what if you put the idea of learning and growth at the same level as having to eat to survive? I'm like, so if you understand that growth and learning
Yeah.
is at the same level as eating, you're going to prioritize it because how were you able to make time for eating? Because it's very important to you. It's important for your well-being and health. So just in a similar way, just make time for some learning. It doesn't have to be, 5, 6 hours a day, 30 minutes a day.
Yeah.
I'm sure you can find a time. And that conversation usually changed our mindset because they realized I'm serious. First, I'm serious about it, and then
Mhm.
that there is that I'm right. That there
Yeah.
was no rebuttal to what I was saying.
Yeah. No, that's great. I love it. One other thing I wanted to bring up too that I think is something else that not enough people do, and it's something that I literally have a short video module built around in my program, which is around reading financial reports at a company. Not enough people, almost nobody, even at the executive level, a lot of people don't read it. Now, they're in some conversations where they understand a little bit more of some of the revenue and revenue drivers, but let's face it, even a lot of executives don't because those layers could be thick. And by doing that, and by having somebody start thinking about things in terms of what they're doing and how it relates to what the company wants, that's a huge hack when it comes to getting paid more, getting the promotions, because most people in a company are just thinking about how they do their job at hand. For you and I, we were constantly thinking about um, how we solve problems. And I think that really helped in that case. But it helped us even more when we were then thinking about, oh, I see where the company's going, what they're trying to do. And it was just a natural way that we built it in. And while we may not have read all the financial reports, we definitely stayed up to speed on the advancements where the company was trying to go, and then thinking about how we can contribute to that. And I just think that's another huge hack for somebody to just consider. Listen to them. Heck, whether you're at the gym, whether you're driving home, you could listen to, a lot of these recordings from the, what do you call it? Quarterly,
The quarterly earnings.
yeah, exactly it. And that's like another, great way that I'd highly
Yeah.
recommend for people as well. So,
Um, One last question I have for you on this
yeah.
topic before we wrap this episode. So, let's just say somebody has taken our advice and is on their own listening to other podcasts, reading books and whatever that's relevant for themselves to reinvent themselves and kind of continue growth. How should someone actually showcase this at to their boss or others without coming across as bragging? Because I think that itself might be a little bit of an art form, not to come across as bragging, but still not downplaying it and making
Yeah.
sure that people are aware that, hey, this is what I've been doing, and I think I can now offer more value.
Yeah, I think a couple of things I'd recommend around that. One of those would be get recommendations from your boss or others. Hey, I'm trying to learn about this. Is there an approach that you'd recommend? Because
That's a good one.
you,
Then
and
once
then
you do it, come back and report back.
yep, exactly it. And then you win for multiple ways. You win rapport building because they're like, oh man, they're taking my advice. You're giving this significance, but you also find yourself picking up the skill, and now they know that you're continually advancing. And then later on, when they have their annual reviews or whatever it looks like, they remember. Not only do they remember that you did that and you're picking up the skills, but they told you to do it. It's kind of like when you hire someone, you take even more pride when they do well because you're like, yeah, I hired them. That would be one technique. And then the other big benefit to that is, while you and I mentioned that paying for, you shouldn't rely on the company to pay for things. Well, if they're willing to pay for it, then that's also great. Like, wonderful when you have that marriage. And in that scenario, when you ask questions like that, often they might say, you know what, actually, if you do that, we can expense that, or we could do it this way. And awesome if it happens that way. The other technique I would say is uh, turn it into a value add for the team. You read a book, you go somewhere else, come back and do a mini little presentation on what you learned from it. It can be an email if it's just a book. It could be a small presentation you put together. Heck, there's probably plenty on the internet. You could just leverage one of those, but still talk to it. And when you do that, you're giving back to the team, which is actually beneficial in general. It helps cement your own learnings because that's another huge hack. You learn more by teaching others. And at the same time, you're seen as leader like in that because you're now taking these things to share it with others. It does not look like you're bragging. It looks like you're trying to share the wealth. That's
Yeah,
that's true. I'm gonna. Oh,
that's a
go ahead.
great
Sorry.
one too. I mean, just finding your own way to come across as a thought leader in your own little area, I think is the start of people looking at you as a leader.
100%. And that's a great hack for people who are like, well, I don't have leadership skills right now. Or for the ones who were put in leadership roles and maybe don't have those. It's like a good way to get there. And I think this is another thing too, when we talked about all the books we read. Well, you and I read books like, Zappos, where we learned a lot, or Delivering Happiness, which is the story of Zappos and their culture, which is a unique culture that's, out there with a few others like the Netflixes and the Bridgewaters from Ray Dalio. And it's like, we learned so much from it that we then started implementing our own subculture within Disney, because some people might be like, well, Disney's got a great culture. It's like, Disney, I'm not, it's not a bad culture, but when you're
It's
inside of
not a
it,
singular culture.
no, exactly.
It's not. It's just pockets of culture just because of how old the company is and how removed the company is
And,
from Walt
and how
Disney
large.
himself.
That's
Yeah,
exactly.
and it
And how
just
large.
evolved. So it's
Yeah.
very hard to have a singular culture. So
Yep,
there's a
exactly.
lot of good and bad cultures.
100%. And each leader can create their own sort of subculture in their own right. And we were being students of that and constantly doing it, just like you did with the Fox acquisition of how do you think about the culture. And we literally implemented our own level, core values within the digital studio that we had worked there. We aligned, at the time with our own, leadership on this. And I think we really stood out, and we saw the benefits to that when it came to, attrition, when it came to engagement, and even HR started asking questions. Of course, for them, it started becoming hey, be careful here. Other people are saying, why not us? But like that happened because we became students of it and then wanted to bring it. And then we were thought leaders bringing it. So, but taking it back one more. So I said, ask the boss what they recommend, or another mentor. It doesn't just have to be the boss. It works great for any mentor. And then the second one being present back your learnings. And by the way, for conventions, that's another great thing. If you come and you present a lot of that, the next year they might be like, maybe we should pay their way to this because they brought back a lot of value. Or when you ask next year, hey, any chance you guys want to pay for some of this? They're more willing to because they see what you brought. But the third one would be, I like to bring what I call like weekly wins into my meeting with my boss. And because I had plenty of things that I was accomplishing, my team was accomplishing, tossing one more thing on there and being like, oh, I really read this interesting book. Have you heard of it? Oh, I highly recommend it. Here's a few takeaways that I had in case you're interested. They may not, but they still hear you. You resonate, and it wasn't just a brag session.
Yeah. No, it was good stuff. Good stuff. I'm going to steal a couple of them because I really like them.
Sweet.
So just a recap. I think, definitely have a growth mindset, seek out learning opportunities and upskilling as an investment, not an expense, and just prioritize it. And I think the investment will pay off. You just got to stay consistent and not think of it as what's in it for me now, because it's an investment and it takes a little bit of time for it to show the ROI to come back. But just make sure you're investing in yourself.
With that note too, I'm bringing in the whole, I guess, Hermosi family. Earlier it was Layla, but Alex Hermosi says something I really like and it sticks with me. And he's like, you need to think about yourself as the S&P 500. The S&P 500 is the stock market. You make your investment, you wait, and it grows. Well, the S&P 500 is you. You're making these investments, in yourself, and ultimately those are going to pay off. They'll continue to build up over time. So invest in the
Yeah,
S&P.
I think there probably is a lot of both factual and anecdotal stories and studies that investing in yourself has a lot better returns than investing in anything else. So
100%.
just continue investing in yourself. Well, thanks again for listening to episode 8. We will come back with episode 9. Again, if you enjoy what we're talking about, subscribe, like, and don't forget to comment to let us know if there's things that you would like us to cover, and we can put it on an upcoming episode. With that, this is the way.